The planets have aligned, and once again, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast. With me, your host, Uncle Paddy, back in the hot seat after a week in the Cotswolds. Joined every week by twin brother in spare parts bin, Andy, the asshole. Woo! And of course, we couldn't do any of this without our bestie, Stevie Telavivie.
Good evening, gentlemen.
This week, we'll be discussing Gemini 2.5 Pro, MCP, what does it mean? Episode 3 of 10 in our entrepreneurial breakdown, business planning and strategy. And finally, we'll be talking AI and drones, the good, the bad,
and the downright
the
mad.
Ugly. We're back, all three
amigos at
of the Roundtable Rethink, back round this highly rectangular table
that we continue to refer to as round.
Yeah, I think this is the first week in 3 weeks where we are back
in the same room.
On the mic. So should be no audio issues this week. It should all be smooth and straightforward. Another packed week, largely filled with AI news, so it probably makes sense to start with Andy and our Gemini 2.5 Pro story. So Andy, tell us all about it.
So Gemini 2.5 Pro dropped in the last few days, and just once again in the game of LLM leapfrog, jumped straight to the top of the leaderboard. So what does this do differently? Well, let's start by talking about a few different capabilities that it has. So the first thing that's built into it from the get-go is this think capability. So if you've ever used things like ChatGPT and Grok, you have the option, if you want it to think a wee bit longer about the answer before delivering the output, you have to manually hit the button and prompt it to do that. Think is a capability which is just architected into Gemini from the get-go. So it's something it does on every prompt automatically. And because of that, the general output is very high quality. The other big differentiator, it has an incredibly long context window of 1 million tokens. So what does that mean? It means you can feed fantastically more information into it, and it can reason across a much bigger data set before giving you the answer. So in order to try and make that real, because not a lot of people even understand what a context window is, I researched a couple of kind of practical examples in various different disciplines. So here's what I came up with. So you've got a customer support and conversational AI example. So a customer support chatbot with a large context window could retain the entire history of a customer's interactions, allowing it to understand complex issues that span multiple conversations and provide more personalized and effective solutions. The second example was a creative writing and storytelling example. So the model could be prompted to write extended stories, novels, or screenplays whilst maintaining consistency in plot, character development, and world building across many chapters or scenes. And finally, I really liked the software development angle. You can take the entire code base. Now, the context window is so massive. You can take the entire code base of a pretty complex platform, dump it into Gemini now, and say, for example, show me all the vulnerabilities or bugs in this code base, or refactor the code base to make it more efficient and to, to smooth it all out and make it more efficient to run in the future. And it can do all of that. So that is a real differentiator in terms of the other LLMs that are currently available. One of the things that I use and I appreciate most about it, it's multimodal straight out the gate. What does that mean? It means that instead of having to download transcripts from videos, it can actually watch videos and reason across the information in them. And it can do the same with audio files, images, as well as text.
Yeah, it can output all the things as audio,
can
video,
output all those
images,
things. So normally,
text.
for example, let's take the YouTube example. If I wanted to get the insights from a YouTube video, I would normally have to click on the video, find the transcript, go through the torture of trying to download the transcript, because you know what it's like once you get 15 minutes in, it always tries to kind of chuck you back to the beginning. Paste it into a document and upload the document to the LLM. You can now just give it the URL or the video file, and it will watch and understand what's going on and reason across that and build it into the outputs that it gives you. So that's fabulous capability that's very useful in the practical sense that I use it in, which is in, marketing and content writing and, social media posts.
To bring the context window thing to life for people, the book War and Peace, which is considered one of the most challenging books to read because of its size and scale, War and Peace is about 500,000 tokens.
Yeah.
So you could put 2 of the entire War and Peace books into the prompt window and it would be able to reason across them today without any increase in capability.
And it's moving to 2 million tokens.
And if you were a support agent working inside a company, imagine having the context and the understanding of every single support query that customer had submitted in the last decade, being able to instantly recall all of it before you consider what the solution might be. So you start to see the benefits now of what a large
And if you're a
context
PhD
window.
doing some gargantuan research project, you can feed in a 20,000 document dissertation, with, deep contextual information in it and reason across that as well. So it's very, very good. And of course, it's jumped to the top of the leaderboard. So what I wanted to finish on is talk about the benchmarks. So all of these LLMs are benchmarked against a set of, they're benchmarks. So this is now be every single LLM before it, with the main one being OpenAI's O3 mini model. So it's now leapfrogged OpenAI O3 mini in all but one of the benchmarks, and the one that we love talking about the most, humanities last exam.
Yeah.
The previous challenger was OpenAI O3 mini, which got 14% on humanities last exam, and Gemini 2.5 Pro has just came in at 18.8%, which is a new high score, which I'm sure will be beat next week by the next thing that launches. So crushing all the benchmarks, brand new capability. It's free. You can go and play with it just now on Google. And so that's the latest thing that's out. In terms of the people that are using it, it's really best used for creatives that do the job that I do, which is sales and marketing, researchers and coders. That's really the kind of 3 big use cases for it.
And there's a wider kind of story here. So don't forget that one of the things we've discussed on previous episodes is Google's advantage, because they're not actually that exposed to the NVIDIA hardware stack. Google decades ago invented their own TPUs, or tensor processing units, because they were in AI before anybody knew what AI was. And I think they've really flexed their muscles this week, and they've really shown their pedigree, because every other AI service has been flaky as all hell this week. Grok had meaningful outages. Claude had actually had a massive outage that almost spanned a day.
Yeah.
And Sam Altman was on Twitter at least 3 times this week saying, guys, stop creating images. The servers are melting down. We're trying to rack more GPUs. So Google seemed to have scaled this very gracefully in a way that nobody else is. And it certainly feels to me like when I use it, like the production ready, ready for prime time, ready for
fit and
business.
finish on it, yeah.
Got a ton of polish and fit and finish on it. So I think they've really flexed their muscles this week and shown that they might be the guys to beat in this whole thing.
You wouldn't have said that last week, and then somebody will come up with something new next week.
I know, but there is as I've spent the last week using these, like Manus, I spent a lot of time this week using Manus. I have found the same old issues that I'm finding with most AI models, which is just a lack of consistency. Yeah. There's some moments of genius, of brilliance, of incredible output that blows your mind. And then there's things that you expect it to do that it doesn't do at all. And so Manus, when I first saw it in the first example I tried, I was blown away. I've actually tried some really straightforward examples this week. It's crapped out halfway through them, been complaining about GPUs. And finally, do you remember the conversation we were having about, well, how do Manus make money? Who's writing the checks for this whole thing? Well, finally, they asked me for some money.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they've got 2 plans. They've got a $39 a month plus plan, and they've got a $200 a month pro plan.
So they let you play for it.
So they let you get excited, get revved up, fire off a bunch of tasks, get excited, and then they hit you for some money. So everything's been pretty inconsistent, still struggling to find things that are production ready. And so I think new amazing capabilities and examples will still continue to flood the online space for every model. But it's pretty clear now that 1 or 2 are starting to emerge as the adults in the room, the production ready
and
business ready.
And don't
stuff.
forget, Google has one major advantage over everything else, which is it's completely integrated into the Google One suite of productivity tools.
Yeah.
So it's straight out the gate. It integrates with Sheets and Gmail and all your favorite Google apps. So
yeah. Listen, we thought it was going to be a quiet summer as it related to AI announcements, and it turns out, I mean, that's only one of many AI announcements.
benchmarks continuing to get crushed all over the gaff.
4.0's been improved and now does image generation. It now does image editing.
Yeah.
They've taken all the DEI filters off it, and it's much more liberal in what it will produce. And on it goes.
Yeah.
We're only if you think about 20% of humanity's last exam, if it kind of doubles in capacity every 6 to 12 months, we're talking 12 months to a year.
Yeah.
12 months to 18 months, and
Before
that's
it gets scorched.
Which was our prediction at the beginning of this, and I think it is honestly going to prove to be nailed on.
Yeah.
So continuing on with the theme of important AI news this week. So when you follow the 20 or 30 big influencers in this space to keep up to date with everything that's happening, you start to see things materialize at an early stage. So maybe for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we're starting to see MCP this, MCP that. You see it in the headlines and you whiz past it, and then you start seeing more of it. And then there's a part that goes, what the hell is this MCP thing I'm seeing everywhere? So MCP is a new interoperability standard that Anthropic developed, and it stands for Model Context Protocol.
Yeah.
Now, the way and this is a really important development because it's actually going to make all AI way more agentic. So the best way I can explain MCP to everybody is MCP is a way for LLMs to talk in a standard way to third-party tools and services and data sources without having to establish custom integrations with each of those things. So let's use practical examples, right? So let's say you wanted Claude to be able to leverage your Gmail account to send emails. Well, the way that would have worked historically is Claude and Gmail would need to figure out some kind of relationship. The respective dev teams would need to sit down and go, right, well, what are you expecting Gmail and what are you expecting Claude? And they would come up with a custom integration between Claude and Gmail. And then they'd have to rinse, rave, repeat across thousands or tens of thousands of third-party tools and services. So Anthropic very smartly decided that, of course, that doesn't scale, right? That approach cannot scale. So what Anthropic did is they put a standard out there. They wrote a standard that said, if you want Claude to be able to interact with your third-party tool or service, as long as you present the data, as long as you describe your capabilities that you're opening up to Claude, using this MCP protocol, this standard, then Claude will be able to use your tool as it's trying to solve problems for the person who's prompting it. And within weeks, thousands of third-party services have now written into the MCP protocol. So let's take it back to analogies, right? When the iPhone first came out, what did it have on it? It had contacts, music, a browser, text messaging, and a phone app. That was pretty much the original iPhone.
Yeah.
And of course, very few people would have bought it for that kind of value, right? But then the really smart thing Apple did was they published a standard for an app store that told third-party developers and tool builders how to incorporate their app into the iPhone. So if you want the iPhone to be able to leverage your app, or if you want your app to be able to leverage the camera or the accelerometer or the compass or the GPS, then there's open APIs, the standards you develop to in order to gain their capabilities. Fast forward many years down the line, we now have tens of millions of apps in the App Store. So I think you're going to see the same kind of App Store revolution now for LLMs. I think there's already thousands of third-party services that can now connect and talk to these LLMs. It's actually the other way about. The LLM knows now how to connect
and talk to these
third-party services. And that is going to open up a whole new bunch of capability.
And just to continue the analogy, it's like the USB-C port for your laptop.
Yeah.
So you plug the USB-C port into your laptop, and because that's plugged in, you can then plug in your monitor, your drive.
You keep saying USB port. You mean USB dongle or hub?
No, the USB-C hub. Yeah. So because that's plugged into your laptop,
the hub into your USB port, and then you could plug 10 things into the hub. Yeah.
And you don't need to create 10 different integrations straight into your laptop.
USB-C standard, right?
On the basis I'm feeling quite negative today, basically we've described as Skynet.
Do you know what? One of the best analogies, and it's a kind of geeky analogy, at the very beginning of the internet, when computers started talking to each other to form the internet, their connections were manually established and hand-coded. Then some genius developed the TCP/IP networking protocol, and now all computers talk to each other through TCP/IP.
Yeah.
This is basically TCP/IP
for AI.
Okay.
Okay. It's an open, interoperable. Now, here's the really exciting thing. Claude and Anthropic developed it and launched it, but every other major model has now adopted it. So this wouldn't be as exciting if it was just Claude. You know, if you had to write like this to make your third-party tool work with Claude, but actually Gemini's on it now, OpenAI's on it now. So it looks
because they've open sourced it.
It looks like MCP is actually going to become the standard, the standard of how you connect any LLM to third-party tools and services.
So for the listeners of my age,
Yeah.
someone learned something from VHS and Betamax.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, right now,
Fantastic.
you actually have to download the MCP server onto your and store it locally on your computer.
Yeah.
But the final resting place for this has got to be a web service in the future.
Yeah.
So right now it's for sophisticated users. You have to be using the desktop version of the LLM. So you've got to have the desktop version
Claude
of Claude.
downloaded onto your computer.
You then install the MCP server. So you might install the Gmail MCP server. And within that one Gmail MCP server, it will come with multiple capabilities.
Yeah.
One will be send an email. Another will be search email. Another will be find a contact.
Yeah.
So one MCP server could come with 10 different capabilities. Make sense?
Yep.
And then if you had a MailChimp or a Salesforce MCP server, it might come with the ability to add an opportunity, add a note, delete a note, update a note, edit a note.
Yeah.
Okay, update a forecast. And so it was put to me by the best software engineer I know, Giuseppe, who used to work for me, contacted me from Sicily this morning because I was going back and forth with him on MCP. So, of course, I knew Gio would be all over it. I knew he would already be using it.
Yeah.
And he quite rightly pointed out to me that right now, it's probably for sophisticated users only, people who know how to set this thing up, who are prepared to go through a meaningful amount of setup. But in the future, the obvious end state is almost going to be like an app store for Claude or an app store for ChatGPT. Okay, here's an app. Here's all the things you can do with it. Do you want to install it? Yeah, boom. And then all of a sudden, it's got that available to it when it's answering
And technicalities aside, what MCP really means is an explosion in agentic AI.
Yeah.
You're going to see an explosion of the second half of the year in AI agents because they're so much easier to build and integrate with these LLMs now because of MCP.
Yeah.
That's taking 2 points off my talk at the end of today.
Yeah, I mean, it throws up so many questions. What's the need for an operating system? What's the need for if chat is actually going to become the only interface that's actually going to be needed in the future as a way of providing a set of instructions to other things that go off and do stuff, man, it throws up so many questions and things to consider for the future. So anyhow, MCP's here. It's exploding in popularity. There's already tens of thousands of services who've developed into MCP, and it will become the standard for AI interoperability. So that is MCP.
Very cool.
All right. Let's take a little non-technical palate cleanser because we're 19 minutes in and it's been quite tech heavy so far. So one that I think we'll all be able to get our teeth into here, which is episode 3 in our
10-week breakdown.
Entrepreneurial breakdown.
Yeah.
And by the way, that 10-week breakdown is about to become an 8-week breakdown because I'm taking 2 steps out of it. So let's recap on where we are. So week 1 and 2, we started with the entrepreneurial mindset, idea generation characteristics. And then last week we covered understanding your market. Okay, how do you identify your market, your ideal customer profile? Now, I kind of know what everybody's instinctively thinking at this point. When did we get to the point, Paddy, where we sell stuff?
And we make all the money.
And the answer is there's one more step we need to go through before we get into the meat and potatoes of operationally running the business.
But we're almost there.
So hang in there. This is almost like the last preparation step before we actually start running the company. So this week is all about business strategy and planning. Okay. And the great news about this week is there is a downloadable template which will be available in the show notes, because what I've tried to do is do enough business strategy and planning based on the fact that you're a budding startup entrepreneur with no product, no customers, no anything. So at this point, everything really is crystal ball gazing, which kind of renders any meaningful detailed financial planning and all that stuff totally redundant, right? At this point, we don't know if you're going to sell one of these things. Yeah. So we're going to do enough.
Never mind what your cash flow looks like in the 10th month of year 3.
Exactly. So we're going to do enough business planning. Why is it a worthwhile step still to do? Because it's going to force you to think about parts of your business deeply that you otherwise would probably skim over. Yeah. That's why it's still a worthwhile exercise. Now, business planning and strategy comes at all different levels. In a previous role, I actually flew to Dallas for a week. Yeah. We had a group of 10 people to spend a week unpacking hundreds of slides on how we were going to double the size of the business in the next 3 years. Yeah. So at various different levels and stages in the business, the strategy and the planning becomes more important and more serious. At this point, it's a thought experiment that's forcing you to confront certain assumptions and ideas in your business.
And I think what's great with this, Paddy, is the fact that people have these ideas, but they don't have structure to them. So putting the structure down so people can actually go through them, so no points are missed. Everyone's got a template as you've done to work for.
So when I started developing this template at the weekend, it was 9 pages long. I've got it down to 3 pages. So it is as bare bones. And I think if you spent a day on this, you could literally complete the business planning step.
And if you spent 2 days on it, you probably spent too much time. And by the way, can I just say for context, when we went through Entrepreneurial Spark a million years ago, you couldn't get support from anybody for anything until you'd completed, remember as a startup business, a 3-year detailed business plan with cash flow financials month for month going out 36 months into the future.
$8,000 off the Clydesdale Bank.
And of course, it took you months to do, and at the end of it, it was a work of fiction because it generally speaking, didn't pass first contact with the market.
Exactly. So the only thing we know about the business plan you're about to create is the one thing you can be certain of is it won't work out like you wrote it down in the business plan. That's the only thing at this point we know for certain.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the big picture structure of the business plan. So you would normally start with an executive summary, right? And what the executive summary is trying to force you to do is boil everything down to its most simple explanation, right? You're trying to get to total clarity, okay? So we're trying to take big, long, multi-paragraph statements about your problem and your solution, and how do we get them into a sentence or 2 sentences max? But in this template, we're actually going to write the exec summary at the very end once we've done all the other inputs. So there's a little bit of overlap between this week and last week. So we start with things like the problem and the opportunity. So what specific pain point or unmet need are you addressing with your business?
Who are you to whom?
Yeah. Try and describe that problem clearly and try and describe it for the customer's perspective, right? And why is that current way of doing things insufficient? Okay, why is that not working right now? Who experiences the problem most acutely? That's another important question to ask yourself and another thing you'd want to fill in. We kind of talked a bit about that last week with ideal customer profiles and personas and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So hopefully if you went through the steps in the order we're telling you to go through them in, you've already done a little bit of this at this point. How big is the opportunity? Okay. Is it a niche market or a broad one? At this point, you don't need deep market insights, TAM, SAM, SOM. You just need rough dimensions. Yeah. Thinking small, medium, and large, right? Is this a small niche market, a medium-sized market, or a huge market? That's about as much detail as you need at this level. Why hasn't this problem been solved before? Okay, that's always a good one to consider as well. See if you can truly answer that question.
Spoiler alert, in most cases it is being solved. You just need to solve it slightly differently or better.
Correct. Then we move to the solution. What is the product or service? So can you literally describe in 1 or 2 sentences what your core product or service is and list out 3 key features and benefits?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, mostly just as a thought exercise. What makes a solution unique or different? So what is your USP? This will take Andy back to his entrepreneurial spark days. There was so much emphasis put onto the
unique selling proposition.
And could you explain that to somebody in 20 seconds and 30 seconds and 40 seconds in an elevator pitch? So that's an important skill to develop. What stage is your product or service at? Is right now, are you just at the idea stage? Is it just super embryonic? You've got an idea of what it could be in your head. Do you have a prototype? Do you have something you can point to that might not be production ready, but it's a demo? Or you actually got a minimum viable product at this point? I've always had a problem with the word minimum viable product.
Yeah.
I think it fucking sucks.
Why?
Because in my experience, minimum viable products equaled customer dissatisfaction. I much prepared the idea of minimum lovable product. Okay.
Like that.
So, here's all the things this would take to make it an unbelievably compelling solution for the customer, but we're only going to do a third of them and then deliver it to the customer anyhow. Whereas I would be, no, what do we actually have to deliver before a customer's really, really going to get real value from that?
I think, though, that minimum has got to be there, and we've all been there, where you just sit and you keep iterating. So what can you get out there into the world that will pass muster? And whatever the minimum is that will pass muster, get it out, stop playing about, let's see what the world thinks of it.
I do get the point you're making, which is minimum viable, it's like, great, is that what it does?
It's
Whereas
got to
you're
be
talking
minimum viable through the customer's lens.
It's got to be compelling. There's still got to be something compelling about it.
Yeah. By the way, this was a source of rich and vigorous debate inside ES Tech. Like, we used to have this argument all the time against minimum viable, because we tried to apply that to everything towards the end. It was like, right, we just need to get something out. What's the minimum viable thing? And often we'd come out from, what budget do we have to spend on this and what can we churn it in that time? Not necessarily that a customer would then love that thing that we ship.
Big difference, though, between an established business adding and trying to test your idea.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking today is about first-time entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
What can you get out there? Stop, sit in your room and thinking and processing.
Yeah.
What can you get out and see that the world can come back to you with some feedback on?
We saw a bit of that when we tried to start the podcast, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many false starts every week did we, right? Next week we'll record the first episode. Shit, we don't have the right lights. The following week, shit, we don't have the right computers.
The audio, the mics,
the audio's
whatever.
not good enough.
Yeah.
And then eventually have to go, oh, fuck that, just go.
Get something out, yeah.
And then as the episode, like if you listen to the first episode and the quality of the audio and the production and us versus this one, a really meaningful delta about how that's improved over time. So eventually you've got to shit or get off the potty.
Yeah.
Okay. Really important one. Do you have any proof points that you can actually point to? If you've got a demo or a proof of concept, if you gave it to a potential customer to play with and got any feedback, are you able to document any validation or any proof points that you've had? Have you got a pilot customer who's prepared to provide you a testimonial? Have you got a letter of intent? Have you done any surveys? Can you point to any proof or validation? Target market and customers, that comes down to ideal customer profile.
Which we covered last week quite extensively. Yeah.
Market size estimation. I've got a couple of examples here, right? So again, thinking on those buckets of small, medium, large. So how many customers could you fit into your ideal customer profile? So the way you should be thinking about that is basically at this level of abstraction, right? So the answer to that should be small businesses in Scotland.
Yeah.
Or UK university students studying design.
Yeah.
That's about as much detail as you need.
Or maybe a vertical accountants in Scotland or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But does it feel like enough customers to build a viable business? That's the only acid test
Yeah.
that you're trying to clear at this point. Then you get into the part that's probably the bit everybody wants to get to, which is go-to-market, right? What's your go-to-market strategy as it relates to marketing and sales? How do you go and find customers?
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody who's listened to this entrepreneurial breakdown up to this point, this is the bit
that they really want to get their teeth into.
Get to.
Yeah.
But it is important that we cover all the other steps. So you want to list out all the specific channels that you're going to focus on initially. How you're going to find customers? Is it going to be social media? If it's B2B, is it going to be LinkedIn, email marketing? If it's B2C, is it going to be Facebook ads? So you want to list out those sources. What's the core messaging and positioning of that product or service, right? Are you able to truly articulate that? Draft a short tagline or some kind of value proposition statement that you can memorize and just be able to spit out on command. How will you convert interested prospects into paying customers? So marketing's done its job. It's found somebody who's interested in your product or service.
Do you need to stand up a sales team, or have you got a funnel that you can put people through that spits out a delivered customer at the end of it?
Pricing strategy. I had a very interesting call earlier today. I think one of the biggest mistakes that fledgling entrepreneurs who are engaged in this process make is they don't consider that it costs money to acquire customers.
And deliver the service.
Yeah. There's an assumption that
if you just make it cheaper than the next guy.
If I buy something for 30 quid and I can sell it for 60, I've got a 30% margin there. I know, but we haven't taken into consideration that you might have to spend that 30 quid margin acquiring a customer that spends 60 quid. So,
and your pricing strategy is directly proportional to the channels that are available to you for customer acquisition and the closing strategies that you'll have available to you. If you're selling a product with £5-10 margin in it, unless you're selling tens of thousands of them, you cannot afford to stand up a sales team to help you convert sales. You've got to find some kind of funnel, and you cannot afford to spend a lot of money acquiring a customer, or you'll have a negative gross margin product.
But there's some fabulous stories we'll recount another day, but cost of acquisition of a customer can be anything from free. And ultimately, it's understanding cost of acquisition and value to you of the customer. And once you've got that delta, then
but
really
free doesn't scale very well. If you're dependent on free channels, it's very hard to scale a business.
But we can go on to that.
No, listen, it's this is the bit people are most excited about until they come into contact with it. And then it's the bit that's going to get a lot of people terminally disheartened. The hardest thing in the world is to go out and find your first 10 customers.
Because, by the way, a lot of us look at our competition and we go, well, they're making a fortune. If I could deliver that for way cheaper than that. And so you start charging cheaper than that. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I need to deliver customer service. I need to deliver the product. I need to go and acquire customers. And so on and so forth. And then you get a year into it and you're like, that's right. That's why they were so much more expensive.
My general rule of thumb is whatever gross margin you think you need, double it, and then you might get close to what you actually need. That's been a good rule of thumb for me in the past. I think the other thing to maybe consider is that not all revenue has equal value. So recurring
is
revenue
the daddy
models
of all revenue models.
So if you were ever selling your business at some point down the line, every dollar of that recurring revenue is worth many, 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 many dollars in exit valuation when you finally sell the business.
Just a transactional sale.
And that's a really good point. I see it a lot in the legal industry. Recurring income gives you a business. One-off sales gives you a job.
Yeah. And you're 100%. Only as good as your last deal.
Yeah.
So, and you tend to find what we would have called in the software business professional services income. That is trading. That's the time for money business. You're doing something to get paid. In our world, it was we are training a customer, we're onboarding a customer, we're delivering support to a customer in return for a fee.
Yeah.
And they are if that's your only source of income, then any people-based businesses where you need to add, let's say you need 2 extra people for every 20 customers you add to the business. They're bloody hard businesses to scale.
They definitely are.
And really hard businesses to make money. So just think about your business model. Think about the type of revenue. The holy grail is if you can be in a recurring revenue business model that's not a time for money arbitrage. You're selling something for a monthly fee.
You're charging based on the value, not,
Great point. Value-based pricing.
Yeah.
making sure that the price point that you are charging aligns with the value
Value
and
that you're delivering.
captures
Yeah.
appropriately the value that you're delivering is another really good one. All right. Proof points. We kind of talked about that before. Do you have any website traffic, social media followers, email list subscribers, lead generated?
Podcasts that you can monetize in the
So have a think about that as well. Then we get into competition. We talked a bit about that in the last episode. Who are your direct and indirect competitors? You want to list them out. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Very briefly, don't spend a bunch of time on that. And how are you different or better? You want to reiterate your USP and make sure you're constantly linking everything back to that. Team, what does the makeup of the business look like? Is it an owner-operated business? Is there a team required? If there is a team required, list out the team members. List out the roles, list out what you think the expected salaries are going to be and roughly when you think those salaries.
And that all needs to be built into
in.
your pricing model, yeah.
And again, the best business is the one that you build to make yourself redundant
yeah.
as quickly as possible.
100%. Yeah. It's
Damn
amazing
tootin'.
how many businesses never actually outscale the owner-operator.
Yeah.
I remember that very clearly, by the way, at the beginning. Like, it was a nightmare trying to get the business to a point where it could afford its first employee.
Yeah.
Like, trying to outscale the owner operator is, if you're lucky enough to get to that
Yeah.
point, that's the second most
Yeah.
difficult thing in business.
But you do have other tools available to you now that we didn't when we were starting our business. I mean, the level of automation that you can inject into any, particularly a small company now, is pretty full on.
But it's counterintuitive for new entrepreneurs. You kind of want to be essential. You want it
Yeah.
to rely on you, whereas actually it's the exact opposite. You want to build something that does not rely on you.
Exactly.
Sticking with the team thing, the only other thing I'll say about that is if you are going to be an owner-operator and you don't plan to hire a team, there's nothing wrong with that, then the only thing I would say is try and find mentors or somebody that you... Being an owner-operator is a lonely old business. And you know what? It's really good to be able to ring somebody up and share the excitement of a new sale or a big win, but also to share the misery of a really shit week, okay, where none of the marketing worked, no sales came in, you're thinking about throwing the towel in. I mean, God almighty, how many times have we all been in that
And you get those weeks.
position? I've had more of the weeks than I would ever like to remember or think about. So being in business is a lonely old game. It's bloody great if you can pick up the phone and talk to people who've trodden the path and are further down that path than you.
Yeah.
So find good mentors. And by the way, people find it almost impossible to say no when you ask for that type of help.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to have a problem finding a mentor. Okay, we're nearly at the end of this. Key metrics and milestones. There are a million metrics that every single business can track. There's very, very few that actually move the needle. Okay, so there's not a huge amount of things at this point in business you would actually need to know. So give yourself a task of figuring 3 to 5 metrics that are worth tracking that would link back to the success of the business and tell you whether things are working or whether things were failing. So that might be website visitors, lead form signups, okay, conversion rate, number of paying customers, revenue generated, customer feedback score, whatever metrics you think tells you the business is working. Start small and expand, but don't not measure anything.
Yeah.
You need to pick 3 or 5 things to start measuring, which will become 55 things in the future.
Yeah.
And
is
so
it worth touching on what those things are? Is it the things you think they are? Is it cost per lead, cost per customer acquired?
The business you're in.
Yeah.
It depends the business you're in.
I think the important thing though is there's something about measuring because you have to see progress. You have to see that you are moving or not moving along the scale. But I think there's also something about realizing that it will take you a decade to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
So the measures need to be small and manageable to start off with.
Yeah.
And the big jumps don't come for a long
Do you
time.
have any sales at all? That's a good one to start with.
Yeah.
Are you generating any revenue?
Me, I'd probably start at the top of the funnel. Think about your basic CRM and how it's set up, right?
You have prospects coming in. Yeah.
Leads, opportunities, conversion rate.
Yeah.
That's probably a good split. How many leads do you coming in? How many are you converting to opportunities, people who could buy something? And then how many of the opportunities are you converting to sales? The great news is if you're using an off-the-shelf
HubSpot
CRM
or whatever,
package, Zoho, HubSpot, 10, 20 quid a month stuff, It will do all
that's
that
table stakes,
tracking for you.
And what's lovely about that is there's 3 things there that as long as you improve on any one of them, you will get improvement. If you improve on all 3, you get
Start multiplying.
You get 400%
Yeah.
improvement. So it's actually understanding that improvements are compounding.
Yeah.
By the way, I've seen this go the other way. I've seen businesses go analytics, cuckoo banana land, and they become so psychoed out with the analytics. And there's so many inputs to the analytics, and the data becomes so inaccurate that it starts producing false positives.
Yeah.
And so the analytics telling you one thing, but then the pulse of the business and everything you can hear from customers is telling you a completely different
100%.
thing. And so I've actually seen that flip in entirely the opposite direction. I've seen people do a crap job in a part of the business that absolutely sucks, but the analytics are there to support that everything is fine.
It's going fine.
And then they become comical Ali from the Iraq War. The guy goes, we're slaughtering them. The
As the
rivers
shells
are
are-
running red with the blood of the Americans.
As the shells are exploding around about his ears.
It brings me back to an old story of mine, just very quickly, of learning to fly. Had a fabulous flying instructor, guy called Alan Stevenson, if he's listening out there. And Alan was an older guy, and I said, "How did you learn to fly, Alan?" He said, "I had an ex-RAF pilot to teach me." I said, "How did that work?" He says, "He taught me to fly by the cheeks of my arse."
Yeah.
And I think, that whole bit, you do get to a stage in business when you can literally feel it. You can feel it, hear it, see it. But until you get to that stage, and that's 5-10 years in, you need to see the instruments. You need to see the numbers on the clock.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed at how much you can scale the business up and still have that intuition. At 50 employees, I could still sniff the air and tell you what parts of the business were working, what parts of the business were failing, what individuals were the contributors, what individuals were failing. Like I could sniff the air and tell you that. So it's not a way to run a big business, but if you're trying to get something from 0 to 5-10 employees, you can run the business a lot with gut and intuition.
And the thing about the stats is the one person that it's easiest to lie to is yourself.
Yes.
So actually the stats are there. And indeed, the other thing about mentors is they're great to keep you honest.
Yes.
You need someone like you two guys will occasionally tell me I'm a fat, ugly. But you need people to keep you honest.
Yeah.
No, 100%. It's good to be accountable to somebody, right? If not yourself.
Yeah.
Write down a couple of goals. What are you trying to get, in particular, not long-term stuff, what are you trying to get done in the next 3 to 6 months? Be specific, but be realistic as well. So examples of that could be launch minimum viable product, acquire first 10 paying customers, validate pricing model, secure a key partnership, get 5 testimonials. Just write down some goals that you're going to print off, stick on the wall, look at every day, and try and drive towards that
100%.
outcome. And then honestly, there's like financial overviews. Should you build some kind of basic income and expenditure thing? Sure. Would I spend a whole bunch of time on that? No. Definitely not. But if there's fixed costs that you're going to be stuck with, then it's absolutely worth sticking them in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And sure, you can predict when revenue is going to come in and how much
If
of
you're
it.
starting with any personnel or any kind of fixed software subscriptions or something that you need to sign up to run your business, then sure, stick them in a spreadsheet and try and do some kind of basic cash flow statement for 6 months or 9 months or 12 months. But yeah, don't go daft.
And then finally, don't forget that all this advice in this template works on the assumption that you're trying to build a self-funded business and that you don't have access to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of seed capital.
We are assuming that they're trying to build a self-funded business because we all built self-funded businesses. There are business models that are negative cash flow models.
100%.
I mean, I don't know.
But they are limited to a few industries, and we're trying to appeal to a very broad church here. We're trying to appeal to somebody who wants to start a pressure washing business all the way. But if you're trying to start a B2B SaaS company,
or you're trying to build the next Facebook,
then there is funding available depending on the part of the world that you live in. And there is infrastructure there you can tap into for financing. The problem is all this goes out the window, and then the planning and the accountability requirements go through the roof.
Yeah.
If you can build a business, if you've got a business that will stand up without borrowing, and we can argue about this one on another show, I've always taken the view the only money to expand on if you can is your own money.
Yes.
If you have to go to the bank, that's a risk, that's a cost. The best businesses I've ever seen are the ones that have been able to scale up based on their own revenue. It's deferring your gratification to later
and
on.
there needs to be
reinvesting.
positive unit economics in your business. You know what I mean? Like 100%.
You need to be default alive rather than default dead.
Yeah.
And by the way, there was a perverse period of time during COVID where there was business models in the States. You're seeing it a bit right now in AI. You know, AI startups who are raising $50 million with a proof of concept and a couple of reference customers, you know, literally getting absurd valuations, injecting a ton of cash into the business, hiring a bunch of people, going massively cash flow negative with the hope that hyper growth would come and it would all straighten itself out in the future. For the people who've played that game,
it's a binary
there's
outcome.
only a fraction of people who've ever won that game. For most people, it never works.
You hit the wall at 1 trillion miles an hour eventually.
It's best to be profitable, and it's best to be get into a habit of being profitable from day one. And when you can afford to expand, use your own cash flows to expand. Don't go borrow a bunch of money.
Sage advice.
Any nuggets of wisdom you think we've missed in that breakdown?
I think it's a lot to take in. I think keeping it simple was probably the best one, and but have a structure to think it through. And what is it? Don't get high in your own supply. Don't believe that you're better than you are. Start with the proposition that this is going to fail. Now let's try and prove that I'm not right.
And I like the capital light message, which is, you know, Entrepreneurial Spark was all about fail fast, fail cheap, iterate as you go. So that kind of capital light bootstrapping ideology, I think, does work for most kind of the people that will be listening to this and the people that we're really speaking to through this.
Don't fail too fast, though. I mean, it takes time for things to come good. So,
fail fast doesn't necessarily mean your entire concept failed. It just means get something out there, get the feedback. Oh, it's not right. Iterate, go again.
Yeah. And I think we touched on it last week, but don't take failure as being failure. Failure is just proof of effort. And therefore you've learned something. Now go back into the fight again. But you know, if an idea is not going to work, or a variation of an idea, for whatever reason, it's too early, it's not the right market fit, that's great. Then you've just learned something. Let's go back in and see how we do it a different way.
And so once you've done all this, once you've been through the template, answered all those questions, you can finally fill in your exec summary at the very last stage. So having done all those thought exercises and committed all that stuff to writing, then the questions you want to ask yourself and answer with a sentence each is, what problem are you solving? What's your solution? Who's your target customer? Why now? And what's your ultimate vision?
And then when you've created that exec summary, you'll put it in a drawer and never look at it again.
It's a thought experiment. All this stuff is a thought experiment, forcing you to confront uncomfortable truths about your business.
Yep.
Okay, so the good news is you're now at the end of all the prep stuff.
We're getting into the sexy stuff
next week. We'll get into the super sexy stuff, which is what is the real sales and marketing strategies you can go and deploy to grow your business. And we will lean on Andy the asshole for that.
Chomping at the bit for that one.
Marketing expert in the Roundtable Rethink podcast. Don't forget, downloadable link to this template. You don't have to go and figure this out. We've already done it. There'll be a downloadable link to the template in the show notes. All right, we are 48 minutes in. Stevie Telavivie with his stream of consciousness inbound.
Well, I'm going to start with a
What's
quote.
on that fabulous mind of yours this week, Stephen?
I'm going to start with a quote. It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. Albert Einstein. So I was really starting to think, and again, I love listening to the two of you, AI, all the positive side, all the upbeat, and I don't want to be a Luddite in any shape, manner, or form, but I thought it'd be worth just revisiting some of the downside, trying to understand on AI the stuff that doesn't work, some of the issues, and maybe tie that into some of the things that are also happening with drones and that type of thing. So we covered a few of these things already tonight, but I read a really interesting, two things struck me today. I read an interesting article about energy use. So we're talking about all these fabulous models, and the article said that we are basically all driving around when it comes to AI and LLMs in Ferraris when we should be using minis. You know, we've talked earlier today, Andy, about up to 2 million tokens now, and some of that stuff is absolutely fabulous. But a bit like wasting water, we are on occasions, and I'm guilty of it as much as anyone else, of chucking in everything into GPT or Perplexity, turning the volume up to Pro or Super Pro.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm kind of forgetting, because the industry is letting me forget at the moment, that I'm burning resources.
100%.
At the moment, we are
Probably way more tokens than you actually need to get the output you're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think there is something about, we need to start thinking a little bit more cleverly about these resources, because we are, there is a power resource, and we've talked before about LLMs will eventually resolve that, but at the moment, power is a problem. There's an environmental resource, because most of these data centers are having to be cooled, so they're using water. So just being aware, what is the environmental impact? And it's not inconsequential. And as we scale up, it's becoming more and more and more. And I think we are a bit guilty of not thinking about what we're doing.
And we spoke before the show started tonight, and we were talking about Microsoft's plans to build a massive data center in the UK, which sounded great on the face of it, until the National Grid informed them that they wouldn't be able to secure them an adequate grid connection till 2035.
Yep.
That's right. 10 years.
Well, that's a governmental thing, isn't it?
But Stephen, see on your point there before you move off it, the Indian guy behind Perplexity, the CEO of Perplexity, Aravind Srinivas. I'm sure I've butchered that name, so I do apologise to him if he's listening. Almost certainly not. Anyway, that guy, he actually did a whole interview about this week.
All right.
So Perplexity had added an auto mode. Okay, so when you're asking Perplexity a question, before you could select reason with
reason with
DeepSeek, reason with, and then he took all that stuff away and added an auto mode in, and the internet went up in arms, and so it got so bad. People just go to the worst place, right? So where people went to mentally was, Perplexity's in financial trouble. They're going to this auto mode. They're trying to deliver the simplest version.
Because they can't afford to run the proper query.
They can't afford to run all this deep research and stuff like that. So the guy had to do a Reddit AMA to address it. And he said, no, he says, you don't understand. He went, new model, like if you're a product like Perplexity that leverages all the new models that come out, he went, there's now, a dozen models, and within each model, different capabilities, and within each capability, different versions of that. He said, the reason we built auto mode is we saw the need for more and more toggles and drop downs and everything, and we saw it being completely unsustainable for a cohesive, simple to understand product. Yeah. So what auto mode is if you set it to auto and you type your query, we'll determine, does that need deep research? And if it does it need O3 Mini to answer it? Or is it a simple web search that we can send out and then reason across with our own sonar models? We didn't do it to save costs. We did it to reduce the complexity and the drop-downs and the checkboxes and the product, which we're getting out of control.
And just 10 seconds to build on that, getting back to the Gemini 2.5 Pro, they've built Think into the architecture of it. So Think and deep research are kind of two sides of the same coin. They're just thinking longer in the deep research. So Gemini is now determining how long it will think for every answer, and sometimes that will return an answer instantly, so that it is more power efficient and it's more token efficient as well.
And I think it's like all these things, systems are going to improve, power consumption is already coming down, but we're also scaling access exponentially. We're bringing down the cost. Yeah. So again, a bit like running the hot water in the morning, I shout at my gorgeous wife, turn off the shower, you're wasting power. Yeah. But the reality of it is we're all wasting power at the moment. So just to be aware of that.
Yeah.
The other one that really has struck me was, we've talked about entrepreneurialism, and we've talked about the fact that not everyone is going to be an entrepreneur. It's just not in their nature. It's not the way they're built. And I'm becoming more and more of a mind, and this was something that came up today in a course review meeting, when you kind of begin to realise that you both are very unique in your ability to understand and to talk about it. It's why we're getting a lot of traction on the show. But I'm wondering how much the average person is going to actually get access or get the benefits from AI. Now, what you talked about earlier on about the new systems making it much more agental, that's where I think your average individual is going to maybe start to see the benefits. But I was thinking, though, I'm old enough to remember Web 1.0, never mind anything else. And, if I could go back in time, wouldn't I want to leverage that and make a fortune? Web 2.0, could I not go back in time? And I'm thinking, why are these young people I'm meeting today not leveraging and using the abilities that all this is bringing them? And it's simply because the imagination, the understanding isn't there. And I think what we're seeing is some incredibly talented and visionary individuals, but probably a lot of the stuff that's happening just now is actually beyond not just understanding, the imagination of most individuals.
And I think a lot of this is, I think the technology has profligated and kicked in before the education system could catch up. You almost need to bake this into the curriculum or something so that kids do have some kind of exposure to it and understanding of how to use it as they're coming through the school system, so that when they get into the world of work, they've kind of got a good foundation.
What's that quote? The future happens slowly, then all at once. So, sorry, Stephen, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was going to say that I think we've all talked about this earlier, off air, but I think we've all realised in our different experiences that this type of stuff needs to be baked into education from the very beginning. There's no point bringing this in at the last part of a university course or at the primary 7 or last year at school. This stuff needs to be being dealt with now, and no one's addressing it.
100%.
Couldn't agree more.
So I'll relay the story I told you guys before the podcast. So I spoke to 6-year leavers this week, a couple of 100 kids who were all good eggs and very engaged and enjoyed all the things we had to tell them about AI. A few of them queued up at the end, asked some questions, and then I got some time with the teachers. And what struck me was just the lack of preparedness about how education sees AI right now. For sure, education, AI equals bad. Yeah. Kids use it to cheat on their essays. Therefore, it's got a massively negative connotation in the educational setup. And one of them posed that question to me. I know, but what do you do? I went, well, kids have been cheating on their essays long before AI existed. You paid Mike Ross from Suits to, set the bar for you or whatever.
Or they've been writing it on their wrist and
There's
rolling.
There's always been ways to pay somebody smart to sit your maths exam. This is the modern day instantiation of that. But that's the only thing we're focusing kids on. What we've now showed kids is, you can cheat on your essay, but here's 852 other things that's chicken feed. What about these 852 things that are going to blow your mind about what you can do with it? So for me, it's don't pretend the technology doesn't exist and don't punish people for engaging with it. Redirect them.
Yeah.
And make them dream. I think that's the thing. It's the lack of creativity. It's the lack of belief systems, mindsets, the ability to look at things and go, wow, the Pandora's box is open. There's a whole bunch of new ways to do things.
But Stephen, to your point that you made earlier, which was in all these previous things, Web 1, Web 2, the difference between this and the things is to leverage Web 2, you had to be a software developer, and then you had to go and spend years learning to be a software developer. The on-ramp for this set of tooling is nowhere near as steep as it is to go and learn to be a software developer, because the only language you need to understand is English in order to make this tooling work for you. So it's so much more accessible, and the on-ramp is so much easier than anything that came before it. That doesn't mean there's not a learning curve to the tool set. There definitely is. And that doesn't mean there's fundamental principles that underpin things like prompt engineering that are worth learning. But for the first time ever, they are skills that can be learned without having to go and spend years understanding completely different languages and ways of interacting with computers just by sitting and typing into a chat box, which, let's face it, or kids who are addicted to phones have been well trained at that exercise for the last 5 or 10 years.
I do think, but you do have to acknowledge the problem, which is for the first time ever. So my daughter's a lawyer, a trainee lawyer. She's going through university at law. She does use ChatGPT as a co-pilot and as a research co-pilot, but she's very fastidious in terms of taking that information and using it to try and understand better and then writing their own work and stuff. There are a lot of kids that are just putting the questions into ChatGPT, getting the outputs, using that, putting it through these content filters, which you can now game using AI as well. And that will pass them their exams really good, but will it make them good lawyers?
Well, let's deal with two separate issues there. So one, I think, even at that, we're underplaying the potential of the technology. So it is, again, saying it's not about passing exams, it's about looking at world problems. And there's a degree of effort. I can, and I think it's the thing that doesn't worry me. I think we all see kids, students, young people, fabulously smart, but it's getting them directed in the right way. That sometimes it's like being an entrepreneur. It's not wasted effort. It's going down. We've all had these fabulously compulsive natures. So you find something, you get obsessed by it. I'm just not sure that this is catching enough attention and enough people are getting obsessed by it.
It depends the industry you're in, right? So I'll give you an example. Every industry is on a countdown to having a coding moment. 1 year ago, you wouldn't have ran out of fingers and toes about the amount of programmers that were using these tools to write code. The future happens slowly, then all at once.
Yep.
There's no programmer that isn't using these tools.
Interview from the CEO of Anthropic from 3 days ago. In the next 3 months, what percentage of all code on the earth will be written using AI? In the next 3 months?
75%.
90% of all code will be written. So that example is nobody's using it a year ago. 90% of all code in the next 3 months will be written with AI. I validated that with my own small network of software developers this morning. They're all using Cursor and AI. Now, that doesn't remove the role of the software developer, because as my guy Giuseppe pointed out to me this morning, vibe coding, which is people who don't know how to code, but they've typed in and made a website in ChatGPT and they put it up there and they go, "That's amazing."
Or they've made a shite pixelated flight simulator,
3 weeks later, they get a phone call from somebody saying, we've hacked the database and now we have all the records. And then they go, "Oh shit, I don't know what to do."
Or on the developer. Or on the 11th attempt to run the script, it crashes, and so on and so forth.
So my ultimate final point there is every industry, everywhere, at some point in the next 12 to 18 months,
it's going to have
its coding moment.
I don't disagree.
It will happen slowly, then fucking all at once.
Including lawyers.
Oh, no, absolutely. So, but let me come on to that, because I think you mentioned a great point about lawyers. I know we've talked again off pod about law. And again, thinking more and more about what's going to happen. So let's take the high value and the low value stuff. So there's low value admin stuff that we all need to do. Fill out a very simple form. I want to leave my house I want to leave all my assets to my wife and my children. It's relatively straightforward. If that's the only thing you need to do, dead simple, AI can do it. But think about a couple of things. When you pay any professional, you don't just pay them for their time. You pay them for regulation and liability insurance. Regulation ensures that they are able to do the job and there will be a recourse if they don't do it correctly. And insurance guarantees that you're going to be compensated if it doesn't go right.
I think that point's overplayed, and I'll tell you why.
Let me finish. Let me finish that. So I think on anything that is of low value, I will take the risk. If I need to change the wiper fluid in my car, I need to change the wiper blades, I'll take that risk. I will do that. If someone says to me there's warning lights on in my engine, I won't mess about with it, because I know that if it goes wrong, it's going to cost me more. And so if you think about anything, so all to my wife and to my kids, might take the risk. I've got kids from another relationship. I'm buying a business. There's other points. So that, I think, is when I go, no, I want to pay someone. So you're paying not for time, you're paying for comfort. You're also paying for someone to manage the process. And probably most importantly of all, and it's the one thing that AI is going to take a longer time to get up to date with, you're paying for that emotional support. Again, that feedback, that perspective that only a professional can give you. That's normal. That's not normal. This is a strategic way to look at things. So I think for low value stuff, that's great. But for the stuff that really costs us money, the issue is going to be professionals will code, will make the system better. And the fascinating thing is going to be how the pricing models change. Do the pricing models get impacted?
So the only thing that I wanted to really add on that is I had a quick look, because we had that chat about professional and indemnity insurance, P11 insurance that lawyers have. So there was 0.89% of all law firms in England and Wales in the last 5 years have had a litigated claim against their P11 insurance.
So I don't know England and Wales. All I will say is in Scotland we have a master policy, and you can go back and see the public records. There have been years where the claims have been more than the premiums, and there are many years where the premiums are less than the claims. But like all insurances, that premium is adjusted every year. And we're actually very lucky in Scotland because we do a master policy. In England, they have to go and all shop about it.
Well, the point I'm making is it's less than 1% of all law firms get a litigated claim against their P11 insurance.
Yeah, but
well done, lawyers. You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
That just tells us you're fantastic professionals who are doing it right.
But here's the one point I did want to make in that. So I'll give you some examples, right? And you're absolutely right, by the way. The more, like, you need somebody to represent you in trial law, and is going to provide a lot of persuasive, arguments.
Or
and
medicine,
stuff.
it doesn't have to be a lawyer, in professional service.
But just for lawyers in particular, so I'll give you a couple of anecdotal examples. The first set of terms and conditions I got from a specific law firm for Coast Entertainments cost me £1,500. During COVID, it turned out they were Swiss cheese, and we had to 4 or 5 different amendments to that. There's no way you would pay somebody £1,500 unless you had a super complex business to draw you up terms and conditions now, because a lot of it is, and a lot of that which created for us was templated work. If I wanted to borrow 50 grand for you, or you wanted to borrow 50 grand for me in a secured loan now, there would be no real reason to go for a lawyer. You and I could draft a contract for that quite straightforwardly.
That's a really interesting point. So again, the other point with that is many industries, medicine and law and accountancy, are all regulated.
Yeah.
The reason why they're all regulated is to keep people out. So I don't know if you read about the poor souls that were all conned out the money on the whiskey barrel scam. Hit the papers. It's Trump coin in a different format, but it's basically an unregulated investment, and therefore people lost a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
Title deeds, so securities involve a title deed. If you're not a solicitor, you cannot register titles. So again, there's protections and reasons for protections. And I think what we're seeing in the world at the moment is, not to get too political, but the people rushing into changes. Not all of them changes that we would disagree with are inappropriate, but being done in such a way as are incredibly inappropriate and are going to cause massive problems for many people. So I think regulation and insurance for things which are important to us as individuals, to us as a society, I think need to have a degree of oversight. You can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I think none of us are disagreeing is that law will have its computing moment.
Yeah.
We're only arguing, and by the way, the computing moment's not going to get rid of all the computer programmers, right? It's just going to make them superhumanly productive.
Yeah, same with law.
Maybe lawyers will spend more time doing document.
It's not going to get rid of lawyers, but if done right, it will make legal firms superhumanly productive and efficient.
And I think that's the big secret for people that are looking to protect their careers moving forward. It's about getting micro qualifications, learning to prompt, working on your emotional intelligence, learning how to deal with the human parts of transactions.
Helping somebody through a divorce or something. These EQ qualities are very important. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's absolutely, no one is going to be immune from the changes, but the changes may not necessarily benefit the individuals. Those of us, the mass of the population, in the ways that we sometimes think they will be.
As a halfway house, I think a lot of lawyers' jobs will go from creating these at
Stop
lower end.
Lawyers.
No, I'm only using that because we're using that as the example. It'll maybe go more to document review as opposed to actually document creation. Do you know what I mean? So if somebody maybe creates a contract or creates an amendment to their will, as I did using ChatGPT, and I sent it to my lawyer for review, as opposed to asking them to create it from scratch.
Again, we could go about this all night. What I will say is, in the years that I wound up estates, people would say, can I draft my own will? And I'd say, sure. But when we come to wind up your estate, it'll cost your family more when I try to unpick all the problems that you haven't dealt with when you drafted it. So there are definitely ways to save time and save money, 110%. And that's what I said at the beginning. Simple things should be simple and should be cheap or should be free.
Yeah.
Complex things we need to understand are complex for a reason.
Yeah.
I think if you took all the individual industries out, the issue you're going to end up with is you will be able to do much, much more with the same or less.
Yeah.
And that's got real implications for employment and society at large. That's insert industry here. You will be able to do much more with the same.
The CEO
or
from
less.
Anthropic said it's not clear when this thing can do most things better than most people, what that actually means for most people.
Yeah.
I'll not go into drones tonight because I think that's going to drag us out. But let me raise one other point, I think, on that whole VHS and Betamax. And for those of you listening who aren't that old, these were two formats of video recorders.
VHS,
which fought for supremacy. So what we're seeing at the moment is a fabulously exciting time. And you mentioned before, anyone in Silicon Valley with half an idea is going to raise millions of pounds. We are seeing multiple large language models, not so many small languages, but more of them are going to start coming out. And I'm just kind of asking myself, how much of that money is going to be wasted? You know, look back to, again, earlier iterations of web, how much money was wasted on things that never got off the ground or only had a very short spell. Where is CompuServe today? I still have an AOL account.
And the CD that it was delivered in through the mail.
CDs, yes. And again, I think there is no way of replacing, because you do need the competitive entrepreneurial thing to drive change. But I do wonder how much money is
You're
going
absolutely
to be
right,
wasted.
Stephen. If you look, Amazon went 15, 20 years without recording a profit, and David Hannemeisen and all these different guys were like, when is the money? Yeah, we get that you're growing, they get that you're adding users, they get that the revenue's scaling. When does the money come back to daddy?
Yeah.
Now, in Amazon's case, it eventually did in spades. But as Paddy mentioned on a previous episode, I think we all assumed that the model makers would capture all the revenue of these business models. And it's not 100% clear that that's going to be the case. Although I guess they'll have to at some point, or they'll no longer be able to provide the underlying technology.
I think we talked before that there, and again, it's all rumors. But is there forces out there forcing the model to zero, the pricing zero? But at the end of the day, there are companies like Google that can, of course, stand up. They've got nothing but runway ahead of them.
Yeah.
But there will be companies out there where the runway is limited. It's so expensive to stack these things up now. The revenue models are far from clear.
Yeah.
There is only one Apple. There's a Google. There's a whatever else. But not all of these models survive, and a lot of money will be lost over time.
We've not seen a lot yet, but you'll see models that just specialize in law, or you'll see models that just specialize in. I'm going to come up with absurd examples here, right? Here's a model that knows everything there is to know about.
Or will that be a model, or will that be an agent?
I think it'll be agents.
No, I think it'll be a model. Because if you're in the...
So what data access does it have that ChatGPT or Google doesn't have?
Well,
To proprietary legal data?
here's the thing. It's a bit like Notebook LM.
Sorry,
from
we're just
Google.
getting back to law again.
No. It's like Notebook LM from Google, right? When I'm researching a topic, I want it to only be cognizant of the sources I'm providing it.
Yeah, and
right?
nothing else.
And nothing else. I don't
None
want
of
to
that
get it
general
twisted
shit,
with just a billion general things it knows about the internet. I want it to singularly only know my little world.
Yep.
Back to my absurd example before. If I'm a researcher about the mating habits of dolphins, then I want an LLM that knows nothing else in the world except absolutely everything there is to know about dolphins.
Yeah.
And I think that LLM will exist in the future. And when I'm asking it questions, it will have a high degree of accuracy in its answers, because it will only send me false positives based on a billion other things it knows.
And it brings the kind of the discussion nicely rounded back to the beginning, which is that will then be a mini for a mini, and you'll not be driving around a Ferrari to try and get a mini result.
Yeah.
So that's maybe.
So I think you could see a proliferation of thousands, millions of tiny models that are
They just specialize.
specialist models in certain verticals.
So it's Notebook LM for insert vertical here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're 1 hour and 14 minutes and another bumper bonanza.
God damn it.
How did that happen?
Okay.
Episode 12 in the can.
3 months. 3 goddamn months.
And before we go, may I simply say,
Stephen.
if you haven't already,
begging.
please, subscribe, like, share. I really think that we are putting something out there which I'm proud to be involved with. I think some of the stuff we do in entrepreneurialism is important for lots of young people.
Yeah.
So on that whole kind of thing about people need to be more creative, need to think. Don't just think about sharing to help us. Think about sharing to help the people that really should be listening to this. So please like, share, and follow.
Don't forget, link in the show notes to the template. Share that to anybody who you think might be starting
Well done
a
for
business.
producing that, Uncle Paddy. I know that took a bit of time.
And we'll be back next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
See you later.
See you guys.